So I'm going to take you through some practical steps on using a corpus to investigate phraseology. And before we move on any further, I need to check that you have two things. Firstly, you need an up-to-date version of AntConc. So hopefully you have that. I put yes, good. Okay, someone's saying yes, great. The other thing you need is the corpus for today. I just added it in the chat in case you weren't able to use the links to access it. It's this help zip. All you need to do is download it and put it somewhere on your computer. Great, excellent, where you can access it easily. With those two steps, downloaded, extracted, it's perfectly. That's what you need to do. So let me just, before we do anything with it, and like while I'm talking, people who don't have AntConc can be uploading it and out these files. That noise area is quite distracting. If there's any way of muting yourselves, it would be really great. I'm going to talk to you first, just to give you a little introduction to what we're going to be talking about, what we're going to be doing today. And our focus for this webinar is P-frames. So P-frames, I'll explain what they are in a minute, but this will give you an idea of where they came from. That really is very distracting, that noise. Yes, so P-frames, where did they come from? Well, when people started getting easier access to corpora, so you'll see the date of this publication around about 1991. In the 1980s, people were looking at new ways of analysing language, which could use the kind of things that a corpus could bring. And one of the first ones of these, which is related to what we're going to look at today, was called the collocational framework. What a collocational framework is specific to grammatical words. So here we've got and of surrounding a slot, which is a well. Any word can appear in there. And Renouf and Sinclair noticed that although in theory any word can occur there, normally there's some patterning to the words that occur. Let me tell you what they found. So if you look at the words which occur frequently between or an and of, you might find patterns like this. So you'll notice that these words are similar in meaning: idea, impression, indication. So that's interesting in itself. But if you look a little bit wider, you'll notice that certain other verbs occur with it. So get, give, or have. And certain other patterning occurs afterwards. In this case, WH words or determiners. And here are some examples of the kind of things you might find in a corpus if you look for get, an, idea, impression, indication, of. And you'll notice I've even added an extra word, inkling. But this is really one of the important early points in investigating phraseology, and it helped inspire the approach we're going to use today. So they called it collocational frameworks. They didn't do it altogether systematically. What came after that, which is a more systematic approach, which you've probably heard of if you've done any reading on corpus linguistics, is what's called n-grams or lexical bundles. And these are fixed string, recurrent strings of words which occur in a corpus, which are found in a corpus. So you'll notice I've taken a couple of examples from the Longman Grammar, Spoken and Written English, 1999, which was it was the first publication to bring this to the attention of a wide audience. So we've got these two things, so n-grams and lexical bundles, very systematic. Collocational frameworks, it's very interesting, perhaps not so systematic. If you add them together, you get what's called a p-frame, and these are strings of words, so they're fixed length. They occur a lot, and then you'll notice there's an asterisk here to indicate that one item in the string is a wildcard. Anything can occur there. So we can use these two origins to help inspire our approach, which we're going to do today. So just a quick example of what this approach brings to our kind of investigation. So if you look at it is necessary to, this occurs more than 40 times per million words. PMW is per million words. This is normalized figure so that you can compare across corpora of different sizes. So this is what Biber and his colleagues found in their Longman grammar. But what the issue with looking at fixed strings is you miss other things which might be similar. So you might miss that also it is important to, it is vital to, it is essential to occur in this pattern. The other thing you might miss is what happens if other verbs occur in there or other tenses of this verb. So it seems necessary to, becomes necessary to. These all seem to be part of the same sort of phrase, if you like. So this gives us a kind of rationale for looking at p-frames. It allows a bit more variability, a bit more variation to occur. So you could look at it is to, and in fact we will do later on, or it necessary to, and you can find more than just what you would find with a lexical bundle. So yes, so I'm just going to add one more term here for now. I promise we'll do some practical stuff in a moment. The approach that's usually used is what's called corpus driven. This means you don't decide in advance what the corpus is going to tell you. You use software automatically on a corpus to tell you what's in there, and then you interpret what it tells you. So that's the approach we're going to take today. This corpus driven is sometimes contrasted with corpus based, where you excuse me, where you decide in advance what you're going to look at. Both approaches are perfectly justified, but with an approach like p-frames, corpus driven makes more sense. So yes, so taking a pedagogical perspective, which really is what I'm interested in when using this approach for the purposes of today. So p-frame approach, I'm calling it an approach. It's a way of retrieving something from a corpus, is a way into investigating the phraseology, what might be useful, potentially useful phrases of a particular corpus. And a corpus obviously is it's composed of text, and it should represent a particular text type or genre or register. I'll come back to that later too. So we'll get a list of candidates. We'll see these later. They're suggested by the software. Then we need to analyze them. So we want to use our instincts, our knowledge of the language to form to make suggestions about what might be a good list, final list, and also to take it a bit further. Like when we find something that's useful, what surrounds it, what's its environment, and what might be worth passing on to learners. So questions might be, you know, is it, I put V-link there, so to cover is, becomes, themes, etc. Important to, a useful phrase. I might as well point out this at this stage that important, I put these square brackets around important to indicate that it's a semantic set. So it's a set of words which means something like important, necessary, vital, essential, crucial, might all occur there. So if you find that, is it worth teaching? What other analysis do we need to do to decide these questions? So these are the questions we're going to be looking at today. So yeah, so aims. I want to show you how you could get started on P-frame research and thinking about it if you want to do it. And also I want to show you some of the potential pitfalls, the issues that might occur. So we'll talk about initial settings. We'll talk about, and we will use these initial settings. We'll talk about how you retrieve this list based on that. We'll look at, once you've got a list, how do you filter it down? How do you decide what's useful, what's not useful? And part of this will be looking in more depth at the analysis and engaging in concordance analysis. It says here, I'll just leave that on a second so you can take it in. It says here, see demo. So at this point, it's time to get started. Let me just minimize this. It's a nice background I've got. So AntConc. So I'm going to assume you've got AntConc. Just opening it up myself. There we are. So the first thing to, well, once AntConc is ready to use, it's just taking a moment or two. There we are. Okay, so AntConc is now ready. The first thing I do when I open AntConc normally is change the font because I find it a little bit small. And you might find it a bit small on my screen as well. So I've set it to 14. It's up to you whether you want to do this or not. I just find it a bit better. So AntConc should look like this when you first open it. Now, if you've already loaded the corpus using the video which I shared some time ago, it should appear here, and this is the health corpus. Don't panic if you haven't done this. I'm going to show you how you can do it quickly right now if you haven't done it yet. So you can open the corpus manager, or you can just set up a very quick corpus which to use right here and now, and it will suggest that you save it. So as long as you know where those files are, the files which I shared, you can come here. Let's see, let's find where they are. Here we go. So I've got a folder with all the files in them. I come here, I just highlight all of them. I've chosen all of them, and I just click on open. And then it says you created a temporary corpus and you can save it afterwards. We don't need to worry about that for now. The main thing is that you need to have 81 files, and it will tell you tokens, so the number of words which is in this quite small corpus, 195,937. So more or less 200,000 words. Just want to check everyone's with me. Are there any questions or any issues at this stage? Hooray, thank you. Okay, so once you're here, just if you've got AntConc open, some of the important things to remember, well, perhaps the most important thing for today is we will be looking at this one, Ngram. I hope you can see it. I hope it's big enough. Just make sure the screen's showing me. Oh, there we are. Yes. So if you've got AntConc open, the one which we want for today is called Ngram. So you'll notice there's different tabs across the top. We probably won't look at most of these, but this is the one we need for today, n-gram. When you go to n-gram, it says n-gram, but it can do p-frames too, don't worry. You'll notice there are some settings that we need to do. They're all along the bottom here. N-gram size, open source.
Hello, Benet, can you please
hold
on? They are just downloading the corpus and they are uploading it.
Oh, okay.
Just give us a few seconds.
We're not going to use it yet, so there is time. Don't worry.
Right.
Yes.
This last one. Downloaded? Yeah.
Right. So, in the room at Barrier, are you ready to continue?
Okay, yes, please.
Okay.
Yes, please, Benet, you may please continue.
Sure. Okay, great. So, like I was saying, once you've loaded up your corpus, should say 81 text, should say about 195,000 words, we're ready to go, basically. But the other thing just to bear in mind is there's different tabs across the top. When I click each one, it takes me to a different tool. So the one that we're looking at today is n-gram. And the thing we need to do before we go any further is discuss what settings we have. So you'll see there's different ones: size, open slots, minimum frequency, minimum range. We need to decide what our settings are. So I'm just going to go back for a moment to the slides. Promise it won't take too long. So we can decide, so I can discuss what the settings should be. And just while I'm talking now, Nadia, could you mute yourself, please? Okay, so like I said, it's really important to decide what settings we have and to know why we're choosing those settings. It's like when you're doing collocation or any other thing with a corpus. You need to have a good rationale for what you're doing. So we've got several settings we would need to decide on. I'm just going to go through why you might decide different settings and the ones which we'll use for today. So the first one is size. How long is the P frame? So the length, usually in most research, is between 3 and 6 words. What's the best length? I've put best in scare quotes because, of course, there is no answer to this question. It depends what your aim is. Our aim today is to find some useful phrases. In fact, our aim today really is for me to show you how to do this so you could make some decisions for yourself in the future. Hello, Sayeda. If you could mute yourself, that would be great. Oh, there we are. Done it. Okay, so what's the best length? It depends on what you want to do with them, but you should bear in mind that if you make them shorter, if you make them down towards 3, you get a lot of P frames. And for any one P frame, you'll have hundreds of examples, which you then have to analyze, and that takes a long time, which is fine, but you just have to bear in mind that it will take longer. If you take longer ones, you don't get so many, which you might consider to be a good thing, but you might miss some stuff that's interesting that's in the corpus. The other thing is they look much more like phrases. They're more complete, if you like. complete being a word that's used in the literature quite a bit. Okay, so for today, I think it will go with 4. This is the number that I'm most familiar with. This is a nice balance between having lots of P frames and missing stuff out. It's about right for us, for our purposes. So that's size sorted for now. Don't worry, you don't have to write all these down. I'm going to remind you afterwards. So the next thing to decide on is the slots. So most research, almost all research I've seen, chooses only one slot. So there's one wildcard and 3 words. So you get something like this. S1 stands for slot 1, because it's the second word in the P frame, main of the, and this one, S2, stands for slot 2, of course. I mean, you could choose 2 slots to the 4-word frames if you wanted, and if you were doing that, you'd be breaking new ground, shall we say, certainly in this area. It would be interesting to know what happens. But we'll go with 1 slot because I think it's just more straightforward for the purposes of this workshop. You'll note here I've added a point that AntConc only looks for internal slots. So you've got 4 words. The slots can only be at position 2 and position 3. You can't have them on the outside. They're not external, they're internal. Some people say you should look for external slots too. I don't want to get into this debate here. If you want to know more about it, there's plenty of research on that, including hopefully my own paper, which will come out soon. I'll talk about that at the end. Okay, so that's the slots. We're going to go with 1 slot. The next thing we should decide is the frequency, minimum frequency. This is really important because if you set it too low, AntConc might not work so well because it's working much harder because it's looking for more stuff. The other thing, perhaps more important, is if you set it very low, you get very infrequent P frames. They're not very useful for teaching. You can't analyze them very well because there's only a few lines. So bearing all this in mind, we want to base this on a normalized frequency in line with previous research. So normalized, i.e., how many times does it occur per million words, per 1,000 words, or whatever. The other thing to bear in mind is if you have a small corpus, then you should set the minimum frequency higher. And this is based on theoretical, and practical research by Besken. So our corpus at 195,000 words, would you say that's small or big? Here's a chance for people online to get involved while I have a sip of water. Small, yes, someone's put small, correct. It's decent. Okay, well, I suppose it depends on what you're used to, but by modern standards, this is pretty small, a pretty small corpus. So we want to set a minimum frequency higher. So I'm saying here a conservative minimum frequency. When I say conservative, that means I'm being careful with it. I'm basing it on what people have done before. 50 hits per million words is quite high, so I'm being safer here. The important thing for us to work out, though, is if we want a normalized frequency of at least 50 and our corpus is 195,000 words, how do we calculate the raw threshold? And don't worry, I'm not going to ask you to do complex mathematics. I've got it here. This is the kind of formula you may need to do yourselves. So if the minimum frequency, the raw minimum frequency that we want is going to be the normalized frequency threshold, so that's 50 times the size of the corpus, and which is divided then by the normalization figure. So let's putting those in real terms. We got 50 hits per million words times the size of the corpus, the 195,000 over a million, which will give us, I'm not going to ask you to do mental arithmetic, gives us actually quite a nice round figure of 10. It's almost like I planned this. So this will be a raw minimum frequency. Our setting will be 10. Have min fric equals 10. This is to make sure that we're not retrieving rarer p frames, which aren't going to be less likely to be useful. Okay, and final one to talk about is range. You need to have a range setting. You could leave it at 1, but that wouldn't be a very good idea, because you don't want something that one person really loves and nobody else uses. So that's why you want to have it higher than 1. Good idea to look at literature. I will summarize it for you. There's no set rule. Nobody's said it must be this, but it's a good idea to have a range that includes a decent proportion of the texts in the corpus. And again, here's another plug for our paper, which hopefully should be out soon. So in this case, we've got 81 texts, as you remember. If we say a p frame has to occur in 10% of text, that's a pretty good threshold. It means we can be pretty safe in saying that these are potentially useful p frames. So we're going to set the minimum range to 8. That's about 10% of 81. Great. So that means, just to reiterate, it's important you have a clear rationale for your settings. If you want to do some research, if you're doing it for teaching, it's still a good idea to have it. If you're doing it for research, people might ask you, a reviewer might say, why did you choose this setting? Obviously, so it's good to know in advance. What we've done, when I say we, but let's say it's we, these are the settings we're going to choose in about a minute's time. So let's just make a note of these so we know what to put. 4110.8. And now we can come out of here and we're ready to go. So if you've got the handout, we're now moving on to page 2, and we're going to actually get some p frames. It's quite exciting. Here we go. So let's go back to AntConc. So if you're on this page, you're now ready to go and set the settings which we've agreed on, which are actually on your handout. So it's 4.1, minimum frequency 10, and minimum range 8. That's all we need to do. And once you've done that, you can click on Start. You'll notice it will take a minute or two to actually retrieve them, but once they're here, you see these are p frames. There's a ranking, the frequency range. These are the things which I'll explain in a minute. So just before we go any further, have a look at the questions.
Excuse me?
Yes, hello.
I'm sorry for interrupting you.
That's okay.
Just, would you like us to put files on the left and tokens? Because I'm working on you in 2 laptops now. I can watch you on Zoom and I work with you on the other laptop.
Right.
So shall we put PDFs on the left and the column on target corpus?
Target corpus. No, it won't allow PDFs in. You need to have the corpus. 1 second. You need to have it and use this kind of document, TXT.
Yeah.
So,
sorry, we got this on the previous session, but it's not ready now. Okay, sorry for that.
That's all right, don't worry. I'll put the corpus again in the chat, and you can use that. You should be able to upload it. Yeah, thanks, Aisha, that's right. So I've just added it again to the chat. Hina's asking me to start again. Start again from where though, Hina? Okay, just for those who may have missed this bit, because it's very, very quick. Oh, brilliant. Okay, you got the same as me. So Atufa and people like Atufa who have got the same as me, please have a look on the sheet, which should look like
Okay,
this.
Bennett, you may please continue. You need not to repeat again. We will share the recording to the participants.
Okay, but I mean, I can do it very, very quickly for those who've just fallen behind, because there is a mini task here. You'll notice on the handout sheet, I predicted there might be some delays. So I've added these questions. For those who've managed to do this, have a look. Can you answer these questions? We'll have the answers in 2 minutes. For those who may be a little bit behind, I'll just show you how to do this one more time. So, there we are. I'll bring it back in a sec. So you can clear it at any time. So if you're opening AntConc, all we want to do is open files as quick corpus, find the files you want. You'll notice I'm in the summer school, and then I go into health, which I've saved already. I highlight all of those. You'll see it's loading at the bottom. 81 files, 195,000 words. And then I go to ngram, and I use the settings that we've just agreed on, which are on the handout. I should check actually that everyone's got the handout, because I can share that again too. So you make sure you've got set to 4, 1 open slot, minimum frequency 10, minimum range 8, and then you click on start. There we are, and that's what you get. By the way, oh, I've got 2 new messages. Ah, yes, we'll come to that. Nadia's asked a very good question. I will tell you about that in a moment. Oh, yes, sorry. The one thing I wanted to show you before we go any further is, yes, it does show 100, but be careful. This is the page size. This is not the results. The results are up here. How many P frames? Up here, ngram types, 392. This is our answer to question number 1. So by default, for some reason, it's set up just to retrieve, just to show you the first 100, probably to save processing power. So if you come here, page size, you can make it show all the hits. There we are. Now it says it's showing them all together. If I put it on page size as 100, it means I just have to go to a different page. You see, the page number changes. So anyway, so this is what we've got, 392. And this figure must be the number of tokens that it covers, I guess. Oh, no, it's this one. Yeah, 8,114. Okay, shall we go through the other questions too while we're here? So question 1 was, how many P frames are retrieved? We've answered that one. That is 392. What's the most frequent one? Yeah, I think you're probably right, Atifa. That's right. So the most frequent one is the one which is ranked number 1, of course. So it's Yeah, the plus of the. How frequent is it? So let's make this a bit wider. Well, we need to just check on here. Let's make that a bit smaller. So it occurs 443 times and in 74 different texts, which is pretty good. So almost every text in this corpus has it. Yeah, that's right. Okay, so this is the question. This next question, what does S1 TT S1 ENT mean? I will come back to this in a bit, but basically you'll see that S1 relates to the plus being in the one position just after the, whereas S2 is where the plus is the third word. So the wildcard is the third word. So that's what S1 and S2 refer to. TT, in fact, yes, that's right, yeah. S1 is slot 1, S2 is slot 2. TT stands for, I will explain this in a minute, type token. Type token ratio is TT, and ENT stands for entropy, which I will explain in a moment. So, and we've answered this question already. Oh, actually, should I put it on here so everyone can see? I should write it like this, I suppose. How many of the total list are shown? Well, we've done this already. It depends on the page size that you choose. So I'll choose all hits. Then when I save it, it will save all of them. That's right. Okay, great. So I think now we're ready to go on to the next stage, the next phase, which is saving our list. So I put the instructions on this sheet if you get lost. And I'll show you as well how to do it. So if we want to save something in AntConc, we just go to File and Save Current Tab Results, as you'll see on the sheet. So once I do that, I get this dialog box. So you'll notice it just says n-gram results. We want to have something more specific than this, ideally. So they're actually p-frame. And it's a good idea from a, research methodology perspective to keep a record of what they are. So that's 4, 1. Just for short. I mean, you could make it more specific if you wanted. But I'm just keeping a note here of the settings that I had, and then I want to save it in the folder. We shouldn't have quite so many folders. Here we are. There we go, and it will save it. Results have been saved. And then, let's just minimize that a sec. Once you've saved it, you'll then be able to open it. And it will look like this. This is the full list, hopefully. Yeah, all the way down to 392. Well, it says 393 because the first line, let's just go up to the top, tells us what everything is. So what we can do to make this a little bit easier to work with is highlight everything, copy it, then with Excel, because Excel is quite clever, let's just make that a little bit bigger. When I paste it in, you'll see it recognizes the columns. So that's really helpful. And then also, we don't really need this, so I'm going to delete it. Frequency and range might be useful to us. Maybe keep those. We don't really need the norm frequency. We could check them out on AntConc if we wanted them. They're not useful to us. So you should have something that looks a bit like this. Hopefully you have. Any issues, any problems? Good. So far, so good. Great. So far, so good indeed. So, great. So now we've got this list. You'll be glad to hear I'm not going to get you to analyze the entire list. That would take several months. What we'll do, we'll just do a selection to show the kind of things that you can do with them. So you'll notice on the handout, let's just bring it up again, that the task, we've saved the list, we've done task 2. We're now going to do an initial surface analysis of it. Now you could do this on your own, or you could do it with a friend if you're in the lab. So once you've opened it, you could look at it like this, or you can, like I said, you could put it in Excel. Have a look at the top 25. Are there any here that we can immediately delete? Here we are. Are there any that we can immediately remove because they're unlikely to be useful? Why should we remove them? And then just keep a note. You could highlight these type token and entropy scores. So I'll give you like 5 minutes or so just to have a look at them. See if there are any which are not useful. Dear Insha, could you mute yourself, please? Okay, so we're just looking at the top 25. Let's do this so that they're showing. Here we are. Yeah, that's almost exactly right. So there's top 25. And are there any we can immediately decide are not useful? So I'll give you a moment, a few minutes just to have a look at those. Let me, yeah, there's a really good question in the chat, which I just want to, perhaps I will show you what I do in a moment. That's a very good question. So in the first 25, we just want to know which ones are obviously not useful to start with. So I think it looks like it's probably a good idea to just have a quick discussion together what we think. Do we have to attach these images in research? No, we don't have to attach them, no. But it's more to remember what you've done at each stage. So I'll show you what the kind of thing that I do. So, yeah, some good questions in the chat here. Let me show you what is probably good research practice. So you've got an original list here, which you've saved. What I normally do before I do anything with it is I will copy it. So you can create a copy and you'll see this one is the original. I could just put original on it. And then this one is the one, like the first stage of analysis. And then I could name that, you know, after initial, if I want to, something like that. And that means that I can see each stage of my procedure, and it helps me remember what I do. Doesn't have to be on Excel. I just find Excel quite useful for this kind of thing. So I'm sorry, my question in fact was a little bit vague, wasn't it? I have to admit. And this is partly because I'm just interested to know, you know, how people react to these when they first see them. So are there any here that you could immediately discard? Has anyone got any clues? Useful in terms of, yes. Well, we're looking at ones which are not useful. So I will help you out here. Anything with and in it is unlikely to be useful. So we can kind of get rid of these immediately. There's quite a few with and. The point being that and can coordinate any kind of thing. You get quite a lot of variability here. So let's just find all the ands. There we are. There's another one. Oh, and there's another one there. Have I? Oh, I've missed one here. I think that's all of them, isn't it? You can see here, it's quite a, it seems almost random. I don't really understand the question here, I'm sorry. So the point being, you don't actually have to look at them in great depth at the start to decide that some of them aren't going to be so useful. I can also point out to you a couple more. Perhaps you notice that this one, 23, is very close to number 25. They're probably the same thing, health and social care, health and social care, most likely. So the other thing I asked you to have a look at is to look at these figures, these values for these ones. They're all quite, you'll notice they are quite high. Or in this case, they're very low. These ones are much lower than the others, so that's even 0. And all the other ones here are close to 1, with the example of that one, the exception of that one. So we'll notice if you got quite high PT, type token and entropy, figures, it means probably this is less likely to. If you are in any doubt, of course, you can come here and we'll do this after the break and actually look at one. So of the plus and, that looks to me to be not very useful. And you'll notice here that okay, I highlighted these rows because, for those who didn't get it, because all of these have got and in them. And if they've got and in them, they're not very likely, almost certainly not useful. Also, because it helped me to show you that when they're ones which aren't useful, they also have very high figures. And I'll just go through that in the slides in a second. And then these two I've highlighted because they're basically the same one. So you might decide that health and social care is useful, and you might not. But even if you decide it is useful, we don't need two of them. We only need one of these. I might also point out for health and social care that the range is much lower on the whole than others. Suggests it's quite specialized in one area. So just going back to the slides, I'll talk through this. Yeah, so our initial surface analysis will allow us to remove, but the ones with and, these are frames that cross clausal boundaries or they have coordination. They're much less likely to be useful. It's just in the nature of what they are. The other thing is you might want to remove at this point are proper nouns. Like if you've got the United States, America, it's pretty much everyone knows this. It's not really going to be very useful. It's a proper noun too. So often people just remove them. This saves us time analyzing them in more depth if you can just remove them at the beginning, because the idea is we want to get to a list which is useful. Fixed expressions, so the one which I showed you, social, care and health, or whatever it was. Probably students in this discipline know it already, so they probably don't need to be taught it. We might be looking at stuff which they don't know so much. That's what's more interesting to us. But these are the ones which also they overlap. So even if you decide one of them is useful, you don't need both of them. And like I said, if you have very high type token and entropy scores, then probably it's not going to be so useful, most likely. So just before the break, very quick explanation, description of type token and entropy. So these are automatic. The corpus, the software will just give you these measures, these values. What they show is the extent to which you might see phraseological patterning in terms of the fillers, the slots, the words that go in the gap. So like I said already, TT is type token ratio. This measures how many different words occur in the slot. If you only have one word, it's always the same. The type token ratio will be near to 0. If you have lots of different words, it will be much higher. It'll be close to 1. Entropy is important too because it doesn't do what type token ratio does. Instead, it measures how predictable or biased towards certain items the slot is. And again, when it's lower, it's more predictable, it's more likely to be useful on the whole. So yes, so like I was saying, these figures range between 0 and 1. When you get high numbers close to 1, that means there's less patterning. They probably won't be useful. Almost all of our top P frames have very high numbers. So in our paper, which hopefully will be out soon, we notice that if one figure is above 0.75 and the other one is 0.9, and whether it's TT, type token or entropy, then probably the P frame wasn't useful. Okay, so sorry, that's a bit technical. I think the thing that you need to just bear in mind is that these are automatic figures. It's always a good idea to have a look yourself anyway, just in case. But these are some general rules of thumb that you can use to reduce your research burden at an early stage. Comments on what we're finding here, very perceptive as well. Know that we need to finish soonish. I'll go through some. Sorry, you've had a disruption in the internet. We'll go through this together now, and then hopefully that will answer your question. So, shall we look at it is important, necessary, etc. to first? Like I said, we've got a lot of interesting comments. What we could look at when we're analysing this in more detail is, as some people have pointed out, what comes after. So what kinds of verbs come afterwards? So you could divide them. So we've got a whole load. Consider is a good starting point, isn't it? I'm just going to put them up here with the other consider. So, yes, so Sayeda, thank you. That's a very good point. So we've got a lot here of what's called mental verbs. So consider, we've got, okay, it's not a verb in itself, but be aware of is kind of mental. What else? Avoid misunderstanding, that seems to be mental too. If you come down further down, you see there's a lot of examples of understand. So that might be one group we could think. So mental verbs. Yeah, we could. They're not all mental verbs, though, are they? Some of them are things that you might do. Here we are. Are more material verbs. So you could have a separate set of those, and these seems to be more about how we can. Remember, this is a health corpus, so it's all talking about people who might need looking after. So a patient. We've got children here. We've got patient here. We've got people. So that might be another group of examples. Like I said, we don't really have time to analyze this in depth, but I think the things that you're looking at in the chat, from what I can see from the chat, Aisha as well mentioned define, describe. So these are more verbal ones, perhaps defining, describing, etc., explaining. That could be another group of verbs too that you could identify. And the other thing you might have done, we haven't talked about it in the chat, but you could look on the left and see if there's anything that is noticeable there. Now, I can see immediately there are a few examples of things like this so it's adding context. So here we are, as nurses. It's saying in what context is it important to do this thing. Or you might have noticed words like therefore. There we are, therefore again. These are all things that are worth like paying some attention to. Here we are. Is there another therefore? Yeah, therefore. There's quite a few therefores, yes. Introductory phrases of different types. Here are clinically. This is another one which kind of explains the sort of context. We'll come to discuss adverbs as well, yes. So we'll come to discuss what we might do with this in a moment. But that is quite, I hope you all agree with me. I think that's quite interesting, how the language patterns in this way and what you've been able to spot from it. So shall we just have a quick look at the other one? So this is what I might call, yeah, it's quite a common academic phrase. This one, again, you could call it a common academic phrase, couldn't you? It just seems to be quite specific to this this corpus or this discipline. So we spotted gain. Are there any other verbs which are like gain on the left? You might have spotted like developing. That seems to be the same kind of meaning as gain, or yeah, develop, well done, yeah, and obtain. So this is what we get. Or we could talk about it in a more objective way, something like lead to. This something leads to, you know, seems to be related. Oh, here's developed again. And this like add to seems somehow semantically related, doesn't it? Yeah, give them. So almost all of them are related in some way, aren't they? Which is quite interesting. Someone, sorry, I can't remember who, pointed out another aspect of the left context, which is that when it's gain or obtain, there's a lot of infinitives as well. So it would be expressions like able to gain, or enable me to gain. You could see that enabled us to gain. We're talking about how this understanding was achieved. What was it that led to the better understanding? And is it reflection? Is it information? You could look at further patterning there by doing this. This seems to be the same sort of thing. By doing something, by gaining information, by gaining knowledge, we've got a better understanding of this. And then, here we've got a couple more messages. Relative clauses too. Can't see so many of those, but I don't doubt it. I think this is the kind of thing that you could look at, and then people were pointing out on the right that we've got a lot of noun phrases that start with the, which is one type, and there's also WH words, one of my favorites. I find it very interesting. So it's kind of a better understanding of this, the answer to this question. And you'll note with these ones, often this is an implicit question in a way. The process of, what is the process of? We gained a great understanding of what the process is. I think we've gained quite a better, if I may say, gained a better understanding of how this phrase works in this particular context. I'm not saying we've completed our research here, but it's a good first step, which you could do, and then you could compare. Here's another page. Yes. Okay, yes, good point. We could do our research and then compare it with someone else we're working with, or for reliability purposes. Okay, so I know we need to wrap things up. Just a few conclusions then, if I may. So we can decide, oh, we've done all this. This is part 2. Let's move on. Okay, so just some results. So if we start with it is +2, we can see that it's coherent. It relates to being important, which is a kind of directive. There's quite a lot of research on interesting papers on using this particular directive in academic writing. And then we could take this a bit further by looking at the concordance analysis, the concordance lines, to see things like it is important to understand, be aware, consider this issue that we're interested in, or this question that we're interested in as well. You'll notice there's some WH words there too. And then once we've done this, it could be useful to make students aware of the kind of phrases which are common in this discipline. We can say similar things about understanding of. So most of it are based around a better understanding of, where better stands for better, greater, more. Understanding improves. So the further patterning that we can get from this is something like gain or develop. Something helps us gain more understanding, more knowledge, more and a better understanding of this question, whether it's explicit or implied. And again, I think this could be quite useful for students who are starting out in this discipline. It would help them to be aware of the ways that people express themselves in health assignments. Okay, just a quick discussion. We don't have a lot of time for this, but here are some notes, some ideas. So this has come up a few times. I just wanted to remind us of this, that IRR, when you're doing more subjective, in-depth research like this, IRR, inter-rater reliability, becomes important, certainly if you want to publish. So it's checking that what you find agrees with somebody else, like a research partner or something. Or just keeping a close, very careful record of all the stages you've done and how the words are related. So that's one thing to bear in mind. The next question that you might want to consider if you're a teacher is how you might teach. Once you've found something, how would you teach phrases of this sort? Your students may not be familiar with AntConc. You might not want them to go to do it like this. You might have to find a different way of doing it. But in doing so, if you do show them concordance lines or examples, I think you might well be helping them develop this better, deeper understanding of language and how academic language works. Okay, the other question is, which has kind of been, bubbling under, if you like, throughout this PowerPoint, is why didn't we find more phrases based on the P frames? Why are these type token entropy values so high? Oh yes, and just excuse me. Yes, I totally agree. Aisha's put a very perceptive comment in the chat talking about DDL, data-driven learning. If you're not sure what data-driven learning is, there is lots of literature about it. And basically, it's using outputs from a corpus to help learners understand language more deeply. And normally it's based on a kind of inductive approach where you don't say what the answer is, you get students to tell you. So yes, thank you, Aisha, for mentioning that's very important. So what I was just talking about here, though, is why perhaps this corpus for today, I chose it because it's easy to access. Maybe it might not be the best type of corpus if you want to do this kind of analysis. And the point here is that this is taken from a corpus of student assignments. Assignments can be of different types, so they're different genres. So one might be an essay, another one might be a reflection, another one might be a lab report in this particular discipline. And if you're doing different types of assignments, you probably get different kinds of phrases and you get more variability, which is why we didn't perhaps find as much as you might if you focus your corpus on a particular very specific genre. So I've done some research on research article introductions, and in introductions, because the purpose and the audience is very similar, you get quite a lot of useful phrases from it. Skills needed. So we obviously need to develop skills while we're doing this. And hopefully you've picked up some today in performing this analysis. Okay, so in conclusion, this P-frame approach can be useful for identifying phrases, but like I just said, it helps if your corpus is quite focused. We've talked about various stages which you would want to undertake if you're going to do this carefully, and particularly if you want to publish research on it. Keep a record of everything that you do. Make sure you've got a strong rationale for what you're doing too. And again, maybe this is a point to just remind you, I've got a paper coming out hopefully quite soon which does talk about all this. That's why I'm talking about this today. Yes, you probably have noticed that if you want to do this sort of research properly, it will take quite a long time. So I think that's just something to bear in mind. If you're interested in it, it will take time to do it properly. Sometimes there's an attraction to doing this kind of research because you just put in some settings into a corpus, it gives you a list. But there's a lot more to it than that. Okay, and thanks very much for your participation. I hope this was useful to you. If you've got any final questions, I don't know if we've got time now. I put my email address in the chat, but I'll just write it here too, in case you want to get in touch with me. My email address is there we go.